So the big headline over the weekend was Colombia, the country of Colombia. Here, the president said, no, we're not taking them, and you can't land. Now, that's a serious deal, okay? So the Trump administration said, if you don't allow us to land, there's going to be a huge economic problem, all right? So here is exactly what happened. The president, Gustavo Petro, okay, turned away the U.S. flight on Sunday, yesterday, 9:30 in the morning. And he said, quote, "A migrant is not a criminal, must be treated with dignity that a human being deserves. That's why I turned back the U.S. military planes that were carrying Colombian migrants. I cannot allow migrants to remain in a country that does not want them, but if the country sends them back, it must be with dignity and respect for them," unquote. That's a ruse. So what Petro was objecting to was the migrants were in handcuffs. Well, they had to be. This is a U.S. transport plane, a military aircraft. So if you've got 70 people, mostly young men, and you don't handcuff them, they can commit violence on a plane. Could they not? I mean, this is third grade stuff. You have to restrain them because they could overwhelm the pilots and everybody else. Petro, I don't know if he's smart enough to know that. I don't know him. But it's ridiculous. So President Trump immediately responded yesterday with this quote. "I was just informed that 2 repatriation flights from the United States with a large number of illegal criminals not allowed to land in Colombia. So it was given by Colombia's socialist president, Gustavo Petro, who's already very unpopular amongst his people. Petro's denial of these flights has jeopardized the national security and public safety of the United States, so I have directed my administration to immediately take the following urgent and decisive retaliatory measures. Emergency 25% tariffs on all goods coming into the United States from Colombia. In 1 week, 25% tariffs will be raised to 50%. Okay. Well, 2 hours later, Presidente Petro issued another statement. Governor of Colombia, under the direction of President Petro, has arranged the presidential plane, that's Petro's plane, to facilitate the dignified return of the compatriots who are going to arrive in the country today in the morning, coming in from deportation flights. This measure responds to the government's commitment to guarantee decent conditions." Well, okay. You want to let the migrants sit in your presidential plane without any restraints? Go ahead. But it took 2 hours for the Colombian president to say, oh, I think we had a problem. And now U.S. flights will go to Bogota, Colombia, or the Colombian economy will be crushed. That's it. That's the story. Okay. So shock and awe works. And this is much better than any kind of military stuff or any of that. And Trump administration has to stop the madness, has to. And tariffs are going to be the weapon, not only here in immigration, but other places as well. Now, I talked to a high-ranking, and I can't tell you who, it's an off-the-record conversation last night. I'm working all the time. So at halftime of the football game, I'm talking to this guy. I said, look, do you have any definition of who's being deported? Are they all criminals? And they don't have, the Trump administration doesn't have yet, profiles of every deportee. They're just throwing them on the planes. But here's what I learned that I didn't know. Some of the deported people are people who have come into the United States recently and have been detained. Okay? It's not all criminals. It's some of those people too. It's a combo, just so you know. Now, there are other things being negotiated. El Salvador looks like is going to be the place where the United States lands migrants, because Venezuela is not going to take them back. And Venezuela, we can't tariff it because we've already got economic sanctions on them. And they're an outlaw regime anyway. So El Salvador, for an enormous amount of taxpayer money, we're going to pay that government tons of money to do this, we'll take the migrants. Now, if you're a migrant, that's not where you want to go, El Salvador. President down there, very tough guy. So they'll throw you right in jail. So if you're a Venezuelan criminal deported from the United States and you land in San Salvador, you're going right to jail and you're not going to pass go. It sends another message. But El Salvador is going to, I think, be the clearinghouse for migrants deported by air in the United States. And most of them are going to be criminals because ISIS is targeting these people. In Denver, in the suburb that was having all kinds of trouble with the Venezuelan gangs, they rounded up a whole bunch of them and put them on planes. In Chicago, same thing. Now remember, the mayor of Denver and the mayor of Chicago are not cooperating, but they didn't do anything to inhibit the raids because if they did, they're going to be arrested, and they know it. This is the Trump policy. He's a tough guy. And Tom Homan, who's in charge of ICE now, is a tough guy too. And no coming back from this. All right, this is an ongoing campaign. Mexico will do what Donald Trump wants. They can't, just like Colombia, Mexico can't absorb a 25% tariff on goods coming in the United States. It'll break their economy. It'll be remains to be seen with the designation of the cartels as terror groups. We don't know how that's going to play out. So anyway, I think that's the best encapsulation that you're going to get anywhere in the media about what happened over the weekend. Ongoing. And it has to happen. Because this thing under the Biden administration was so far out of control. I don't think Americans understand how bad this is. And that's why Joe Biden will get down in history as the second worst president ever. Okay, and that's the memo. Joining us now is the best guest we could find on any of this. His name is Gordon Sondland. You may remember he was the ambassador to the European Union for 2 years, the first Trump administration. Joins us now from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Let's start with the deportations first. This is obviously shaking up the Western Hemisphere. Got a very liberal government in Brazil. They're rattling cages. I think the capitulation in Colombia sends a big message to everybody. How do you see it?
Well, let me pivot to more of a macro issue, which is I think President Trump has changed the transition playbook forever for every president, regardless of party. And, you know, there was a lot of consternation as to why he wasn't signing on to the normal transition process. And now we can see why. Because there was a lot of work going into all of these various initiatives, 30 or 40 of them, all launched at the same time, that were not shared with the current administration, which they would have been had he signed on to the normal process, which meant people would have been able to undermine him before he got out of the gate.
So let me stop you. So you believe that the Trump administration didn't share any of this with the Biden administration because the Biden administration would have leaked it to the press and created hysteria. Is that what you're saying?
Among other things, I think also what we all refer to as the deep state would have already started to put things into motion to put sand into the gears. And that's why they kept things at Mar-a-Lago. They kept things quiet. They had their landing teams ready. And that's why you saw not only shock and awe in terms of the launch of all of these initiatives, but shock and awe in terms of HR moves in getting rid of people who would have had their hands on the levers of power. And that's why now, when the president needs to threaten, unfortunately, a foreign leader to do the right thing, which is take your own citizens back, there isn't a lot of bureaucracy pushing back on that. He sends a tweet, scares the ever-loving daylights out of the guy. Within 2 hours, as you pointed out, things go backwards. And this is how you have to conduct foreign policy when things have gotten so bad in the last 4 years.
Sure, it's an emergency, and there's no doubt about it. And I don't, as I said, I don't think most Americans understand how bad the Biden administration was, how derelict in their duty they were by not upholding the federal law in place on immigration. But you also have the perception around the world that Donald Trump's a dictator and he's going to come into our country and he's going to cause trouble for us. And that's something that he has to mitigate, correct?
Well, he has to mitigate it, but when you peel back the layer of the onion, Bill, we didn't go into Colombia and start a fight. We simply said, these people, your citizens, snuck into our country. We just want to send them back. And it's the president of Colombia that started the fight. Now, just imagine for a moment that we sneak into Colombia. You're going to wind up in a Colombian jail. You're not going home on a presidential aircraft.
And I mean, as I pointed out, the phony excuse that they're in handcuffs and that's some kind of human rights violation. And these are the worst of the worst. You're going to let them run around a plane unattended? I mean, it's look, ridiculous.
I get a kick out of the fact that every time I go to Mexico on vacation or as a tourist, I'm going to a very, usually very high-end resort in one of Mexico's nicer places. I'm planning to spend a ton of money, and the Mexican Customs Authority give me the third degree like no one else. And I'm there to help their economy. And yet, on the other hand, people want us to be tolerant of someone simply sneaking across the border. So hypocrisy has its finest hour.
With all due respect, Mr. Ambassador, you shouldn't go to Mexico. I'm never going there again because they're an enemy to America. They hurt us and they kill people here and they won't do anything about it. So no Mexico for me. And the Caribbean's got a lot of lovely resorts and a lot of good countries down there. Let's shift over to
Food for thought.